So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of walk you through some of the features that we have developed, right? Mainly in terms of how can you author workflows in Conductor and debug. So let me just jump right into it. Awesome.
Yes.
Great. So I'm sure many of you are using Conductor today and kind of working with Conductor and, creating workflows and, so forth. What I wanted to kind of do in the next few minutes is kind of go over some of the features in terms of how you can author workflows in the Conductor UI, a feature that we have kind of developed over the last few months, and also kind of give you an idea in terms of, how we can kind of go about debugging workflows when things do not kind of work out as expected, or sometimes you are just trying out things to see, how things kind of are working, right? Now, Conductor is a very flexible system. It allows you to define workflows in multiple ways. And, one of the more powerful ways in which you can define workflow is through UI. So I'm going to jump right into it. As you can see my screen here, right? This is the list of all the workflows. And if you go to the UI, you see a button to kind of define a new workflow. Now, I'm going to reset the screen so it starts from the scratch. But what you see here is a canvas. This is the canvas where you can kind of go and design your entire workflow DAG and all the input and output parameters. And it kind of helps you in two ways, right? It allows you to kind of visualize the workflow as you are building. At the same time, what we have done is that you have different types of tasks in the system. And for every task, you have very specific inputs and output. So, the UI also understands the semantics of the system task in terms of what kind of inputs does it need, what kind of outputs does it need, and what are the configuration parameters that you have. So, you don't have to kind of take the guesswork or, try to go refer to documentation and such, and instead it's all there, right? Which means, less guesswork and more productive use of your time. So how does that work? So when you start, if you start with a completely blank canvas, this is your workflow, right? Basically, there are no tasks here. Every workflow has a name. So, let's start with a name. Meetup workflow demo, right? And as you can see, right, on the right-hand side here, you have all the parameters related to workflow here. You can define the input parameters. Let's say I'm going to start by saying, amount is one of the input parameters here. I don't need to have an output parameter, so I'm going to clear it out. The workflows in Conductor can be restartable or not. That allows you to make sure that workflows which are not idempotent or has side effects, when you do a restart, you can mark it such a way and accidentally you don't end up restarting them. Also, you can specify things like timeouts. Let's say I'm going to put a timeout of 20 minutes here. And if the workflow fails, what is the compensation workflow that I need to run here? There you go. I have a workflow called deal with the failure. So I'm going to put that here so that if the workflow fails, this child workflow or the failure workflow is going to get triggered. So I have my workflow things out of the way now. Now, what I want to do is I want to start adding the tasks, right? And of course, there are simple tasks and more complex versions of the task in terms of switch statements and so forth. So the moment you click on the plus button here, you see the list of all the tasks available to you, right? And we keep on adding more and more stuff here. But essentially, when you think about tasks, they kind of fall into two main categories. You have the system tasks, which implements a particular functionality, right? So, you have an HTTP task or a polling task or a publishing to Kafka task and so forth. And then you have the operators, which are basically, if you think about it, your programming language constructs, right? Like, your kind of thread.wait or switch or loops and set variable and so forth. And finally, your business implementation with all the workers. The simple tasks, as it is called in Conductor, which is a listing of all the tasks that are implementing specific business functionality. So let's go ahead and build a workflow, right? What we are going to do is we're going to build a small fraud or a payment flow. So what we want to do here is, here's my high level flow. What I want to do is when I trigger a workflow, I want to, this is why I added the amount here, right? Imagine this is a workflow that does some sort of payment transaction. So amount is one of the input types. And what I want to do is I want to add a switch task here. I want to call check amount limit and the reference name. You can see here, right? I can pretty much type a lot of stuff here. And the more powerful thing about Conductor is, you don't have to necessarily work with simple values. You can also write JavaScript inside it. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to check if the amount is greater than 10,000, then I'm going to return back and say that, we should check for any fraudulent activity or not. And then in terms of input parameters, I'm using input here. So I'm going to say workload input.amount. And there you go. As you can see, right, it takes the guesswork out. Is it amount uppercase, lowercase, all uppercase? I don't have to worry about all these things. I'm going to add one switch case, which we say right here, right? I'm going to say required. What do I want to do here? I want to call fraud check here. So I'm going to just add a simple task. And when I start writing it here, right, like it starts to show me all the available tasks. So let's say if I have something called fraud check. Oh yeah, I do have it. So I'm going to call a fraud check task, right? So this is the task that's probably going to do some sort of KYC or maybe call a machine learning model and do some sort of check on the fraud. Now, what do we want to do? Let's another add switch task here, right? What we are going to call it is let's say we want to process the deposit right here. What we want to do here is, again, I'm going to use a JavaScript here to do the processing. Makes it easy. And of course, we have a couple of parameters here. We are checking if there's a fraud check required or not. And this is the output of the fraud check amount. And then we are going to check the result. And for the result, what we are going to do is, sorry, what's the name of it we have given? Fraud check. Result. There you go. And now this does output one or two things, right? Either it will say that skip because it failed the fraud check. And if it did not fail, then we want to go and process the task. So I'm going to add one more switched case here called process transaction. And when we process the transaction, we want to basically deposit some cash amount, right? So what we are going to do here is just that. And I'm going to add, imagine this is, so let's take, for example, this case, right? When I do process transaction, what I have is a microservice that, given the, information can go and deposit the cash. So we are going to put an HTTP task here. Now, the good thing about the UI is that when you are calling an HTTP task, it has all the information available here, in terms of all the methods, URL, you can put the parameters and everything. For the sake of demo and simplicity, we're just going to do a get operation here. So that kind of simplifies things. But this can get really complex if you really want it to, right? Like you can post, probably you're going to post slightly more than just that. And then we want to do some message processing here. So we are going to basically create an inline task. Inline task is a way in which you can execute JavaScript in Conductor. And what we want to do here is we want to write a simple function. So what we are doing here is that we are just constructing a simple message, right? And depending upon the result of the fraud check, we are going to basically create the message that matches the we are running a little bit short on time, so I'm going to move things a little bit quicker. And as you can see, the UI automatically does a type ahead for me, so I don't have to worry about trying to figure out. Yep. Check result. There you go. Now, once this is done, what I want to do is I want to do a couple of things, right? I want to kind of run things in parallel. Like I want to send out an email, and after sending an email, wait for a bit and send out an SMS. So, the perfect way to do that is going to be a fork join. So, we can do kind of multiple things in parallel. So I'm going to just say, we have a send email task. And before we send out an SMS, we want to wait for a bit, right? So let's say we're going to wait for 2 seconds. As you can see, right, no thread.wait or anything. I can just wait, and there you go. My entire workflow is complete here. I can just hit the save button here. It's going to run some validations, and it's there. As you can see, it also generates the code automatically, which means I can download this code, put it into my version control if required, or use the get API that's there, and run through CI/CD process. That's as simple as that. I have some examples of this workflow that are currently running, as you can see. Now let's take a look at it. Imagine this is one workflow, right? This does one processing. What if I were to kind of go and process the whole batch? Let's say I have got 10,000 users for which I want to kind of go and do the same thing. What I can do is the power of sub workflows, right? I can create a new workflow here. Let's say what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new workflow. Let me just quickly do this. I'm going to speed up things a little bit, and I'm going to reuse a workflow that we have created already. So this is my batch processing workflow. Okay. What this workflow does is it takes the input parameter as the number of users to send, and this could be basically your kind of other information that will trigger the batch. And then I have a dynamic fork. The thing about dynamic fork is that dynamic forks allows you to essentially kind of go and run things in parallel, but the parallelism is completely dynamic. It can be determined at runtime as opposed to kind of doing it at processing time. So like, in this case, I have a simple task. This task basically implements some business logic that could basically go to a database, check which users the payments have been scheduled, and output the list of payments. And then I have a fork operator, which will basically take the output of the deposit batch task. So this is the inputs, and it goes and starts the workflow. And that's it. Like, I basically what I end up with is a powerful kind of way to kind of run, massive parallel forks. And let me give you an example here. I know we are slightly running less on the time. Just give me a second. But this is one of the workflows that I have here. So like, as you can see here, this is my payment flow at runtime. And I can actually look at the workflow, what happened here, in terms of this is the switch statement that we added earlier, right? I know when was it scheduled, start, and what were the inputs given here, and what were the outputs. As you can see, the selected case was skipped, and it should have taken the skip path and done the things accordingly. Similarly, this one makes an HTTP call. I know the entire response and everything. Same thing goes here. So, the beautiful thing about this is, when things kind of go wrong, exactly what's happening. Take, for example, this one, right? I know exactly which host it ran on. In this case, it's a Kubernetes pod. So, if things go wrong and if I don't have enough logging information here available, I can log on to this pod or use my logging system to kind of find out what was happening here and trace out the transactions and things like that. Similarly, if something goes wrong, take, for example, let's take a example of a workflow that failed. Yeah, so as you can see, this workflow has failed. Now, why did it fail? We can see that's one of the tasks here at the end has failed. And, traditionally, as I said, right, like, debugging when things go wrong in a distributed systems is much, much harder unless you have logging aggregation and everything. But even then, you have to kind of go and correlate things. This one actually fetches the right information there. I know here the reason why it failed was because there was, say, service unavailable. So most likely the remote service had a problem and it was undergoing some sort of maintenance. So what can I do here? I can do one or two things, right? Maybe this is a genuine problem. My payload was wrong or something. In that case, I can fix this, rerun the workflow with a new input. And there is an API available to do a rerun. So, what I can do is I can say the first 4 tasks are good. There's nothing to be done there. I can just leave them as it is. And the 4th one, I can fix the inputs. Maybe the input given were wrong. So I can fix the inputs and, move forward from that point onwards. Or what I can do is, if everything looks good, it was just a temporary glitch in the remote service, I can go and retry from it where it failed, which means I don't have to worry about now, go fix the database, figure out a script or anything. I can just rerun exactly where it left off and it will continue from that point onwards. This becomes even more useful when you have very complicated fork joins and parallel flows running, because, you can pick up exactly the task that failed in a massive parallel fork with, 100 different branches, and it will skip the 99 of them and just take the one that failed and continue forward from that point onwards. So that's basically allows you to kind of do that. Now, the other powerful thing about Conductor also is, you can actually route your workflows to a specific task. So take, for example, this is my workflow here. What I can do is I can start a workflow here. And as you can see, right, what I did was when starting a workflow, I put a star and routed it to a debug queue, which means that none of the existing tasks are going to pick up this workflow. So now this workflow is basically waiting for my input. And what I can do is I can use the UI to kind of go and complete the task, change the output that I think is going to be the right output and so forth. So that allows me to kind of do a step-by-step debugging of the workflow if there is a problem. And you can skip the tasks, which are like either you can either you can kind of reroute the task to your kind of debugging flow, all of them, or you can route very specific tasks to your kind of debugging flow. And you can either use the UI to kind of debug and see what's going on, or you can hook it up to your SDK and route that to your local, let's say IntelliJ or Eclipse, and then do a step-by-step debugging. So that kind of gives you the power of remote distributed debugging as well through that feature. So I'll take a pause here. I know we are almost at the time. So I want to also leave some time for the questions. If there are any questions, or if you want me to dig deeper into a specific area, happy to do that.
Hi, Viren. Thank you so much for the wonderful session. The UI for Workflow Editor looks great, but how can one actually gain access to it?
So this UI is available in the Orkes. So you can do one or two things. You can go to the playground, play.orkes.io, which is where I'm kind of showing the demo, and then you have full access to this UI. You can take a look at it. The other option is to come and join the Slack channel and chat with us. Happy to kind of get you hooked up to this and take it from there. Yeah. I think there was another question from Igor in terms of how many steps can you have in a workflow. So the answer is it's purely limited by your installation and the cluster size. You can very easily have, like, we support workflows up to 65,000 tasks and steps. So they can all be running sequentially or parallel. Most likely you want to run them in parallel.
Awesome. There is another question from Russell, which is, are any of these changes making it to the community release?
Good question. So this is not yet in the community. Of course, the plan is to move it into community at some point of time. So stay tuned for that.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Viren. There is one question though that we did get, which is, which is coming from Jace, and he was asking if you could highlight some of the general use cases of Conductor, and also share a few tips on how to get started with the platform.
Absolutely. So in terms of general use cases for the Conductor, so Conductor is a very general purpose orchestration platform. And what that means is, we have seen it being used in variety of different use cases and industries. It ranges, I mean, of course, we started using it at Netflix. So, its roots are in the media industry, but I would say that the biggest user of Conductor today is in supply chain, retail, and into the fintech environment. But pretty much everything that you can think of, and the next two upcoming sessions are a very good examples of the diverse use cases that we have on Conductor. So that's one. I think the second question was, Sangeeta, can you remind me that again? What was the second part? What was?
Can you share some general tips on how to get started on the platform?
Absolutely. So there are kind of two main ways. What I would recommend is, one is, if you don't want to kind of get into the hassle of trying to kind of download and run and everything, you can use play.orkes.io. It's a playground. It's free for all, and you can definitely try out workflows and write code against it and things like that. So it gives you a very good way to quickly test it out, see the power, and use it. The other option is definitely to kind of go to GitHub, download it and build it yourself. If you are if you want to kind of contribute to a feature or want to see inside of what's going on there and things like that. So that's another option.
Following up on the same question, there's one question that we got from Jesh, and he wanted to basically understand that what are some of the organizations in tax software that are leveraging Conductor, and if you could also share like one or two use cases in the same domain.
Absolutely. So we do know the companies who are in the taxation kind of area that is using Conductor. Of course, we can't share the names because of confidentiality and NDA and everything, but we can definitely chat offline if needed, if you want to get more context there. So that's definitely one of the wheelhouse for Conductor, and as we all know, right, it has not been a long time before the tax season was over. So it's a very complicated field, and workflows are a perfect tool for, at least on the backend side, to solve some of the problems.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Viren, for answering those questions. And
I think
I do see that we have one last question, and that's from Parthiv. And he's asking that how can basically we scale workflows?
I think that's a great question. And just to the point where Sangeeta was mentioning that we recently revamped our documentation. So, let me just kind of quickly show you. So workers run outside of Conductor into your environment. And the best way to scale workers is through kind of, why don't I just jump right into it? So we have a dedicated page for this called Guide to Scaling Workers. So I highly recommend kind of taking a look at it and go through it. But what Conductor does is publishes a lot of metrics in terms of how your workers are doing. What's the pending work for a given type of worker, how many tasks it is completing per second, and amount of time it is taking. And essentially, you can use these metrics to understand, how busy your workers are, what's the backlog, and you can scale them. And now, let's say if you are running everything on Kubernetes, you can plug in this metrics onto something like KEDA, for example, and which is a Kubernetes autoscaler, and you can scale up and down things, right? Or you can do this manually if it's not very kind of elastic in nature. But there are multiple ways in which you can do it. What Conductor does is gives you a lot of kind of metrics to be able to do that.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing that, Viren. If people have more questions, you can put it up on the Q&A, and we do have an open Q&A, and it doesn't just have to be limited to today's talks, but it can also be general queries that you have around Conductor or the community. So you can just directly put it up on quick Q&A, and we can take it towards the end of the session.